Hi everybody, how you doing? It's Friday afternoon. I hope nobody's suffering with the coronavirus, but I'm sure we're all keeping up to date with the news and wondering what's going to happen. Um, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Neil Woods, and I run the group Kick Thief Out of Stress. And this is the first one in a series of videos which I promised that I would do around covering the topic of how I suffered with stress. Now, this is something that happened over 20 years ago, although I've had stressful moments through my life over periods of times since then. But this was the point where, or rather leading up to the point where I suffered terribly with anxiety, with stress, with depression, and finally tried to check out from this mortal coil. And I said I would do this series of videos. I'm not sure just how many there'll be or how long each one will be. And what I'm having to do is go back into my thoughts, to my memories on what I recall happening. So it's as true as I believe it to be true. Other people that were around me will have their own realities in relation to it. Although most of the people that I worked with back then I don't know anymore because it was when I was a police officer. So what I wanted to try to do was try and be as real as possible and try to share as many of the things, as I say, that I can remember back then of what happened and how it happened. Now, at the end of this series of videos, I'm going to do a final video where I go back over these videos and explain how, or rather what I know now, not what I've learned or what my ego tells me, but I absolutely know from the heart to be true, on why I suffered in that way. And it's the whole basis of the coaching that I do now, that can help people in a much, much quicker way than all the modalities and all the other help that I received at the time. So I'll start off with saying that at the age of 27, I went into, or 26 rather, went into the police force around about 1997. And sorry, 1993. I'm getting my dates completely wrong. But I'm not going to stop the video. As I say, I want to try and make this as real as possible. In 1993, after many years of trying and lots of different issues with trying to get in, with them trying to verify my working history and companies having closed down and things, I finally did my entrance exams and received the information that I'd been accepted and I was enrolled into the police. Everything was going fairly well to start with, and then we went to the police training camp, which back then you did, if I remember rightly, 10 weeks at Brighton on Dunsmore, had 5 weeks away, and then did a final 5 weeks there. And I started in a group. There was around about 17 or 18 of us with two sergeants, and it was going swimmingly. I thought extremely well for the first, I think, couple of weeks. Seemed to be getting on well with the people in the class with me. And then the one afternoon we did an exercise where we were using a visual aid to give feedback on other people in the group. Now, this was a group that I felt I'd got fairly close to, and a lot of people were visiting me after we'd done the lessons, and I was helping them out with personal issues and the training. And as I say, I felt I was doing really well because the morning before we did this exercise, I met with the sergeants to do a review and was told that I was on course for being the officer of the intake, which was quite an accolade really, when there were, I think, probably about 200 or so officers, maybe more, on the whole of the intake. So it was an accolade that I was very proud of within the morning, and I'd sort of kept it to myself. And then we had this situation in the afternoon where we gave feedback, and most of mine was quite negative, and it was something that shocked me tremendously. And what struck me was there seemed to be almost a lot of jealousy within the group that I was seen to be doing so well, even though these people were coming and speaking to me privately and talking about marriages and relationships and training and how they were feeling and helping them out with their coursework and those sorts of things. Suddenly turned on me, and that was the first real negative experience I had within the training. And then one of the chaps in there tried to sort of take control of the group, and what it meant was that I stopped sort of spending as much time with my intake and started to mix with some of the other intakes that were there. I think we were a mod 2, senior mod 3s, and then mod 4s or something like that. And that really helped me even more because they'd already studied all the stuff that we were going through. So it gave me a sort of a bit of a jump forward on the work that we would be doing. And it just meant it was a little bit easier for me to then do the rest of it. So we did the first 10 weeks, and yeah, everything seemed to be going okay, but there was this little blot on the copybook that the class had sort of, well, not all of them, but some of them had turned on me a little bit. And it was one of these things where they could give feedback, but nobody put their names on it. So at the end of the day, I was a little bit emotional, a little bit distressed by it, because I thought I was doing really well and people liked me and the rest of that sort of thing. And I remember a few of them coming to see me after the course, or after that day rather, and sort of saying, "Oh, don't take it to heart, Neil," and I'm sure they didn't mean it, and these sorts of things. But that was the first sort of negative. And when we then had 5 weeks back at station, and we start and we have a tutor constable and we go out with them and all the rest of it, and the tutor constable I was with was well liked by the inspectors, and he was looking to try and get into divisional observations and this sort of thing. And we had a couple of things that happened whereby we were allowed to go and do some observations for them, and it was above a dentist's in Coventry, and we were looking at a parade of shops. And the other constable that I was with quite liked some of the ladies that were working in this dentist's, and when we were on a bit of a quieter bit in the afternoon, he'd set me downstairs to say, if anybody wanted to come up and have a look at what we were doing, that they could do. And I remember challenging him at the time and saying, "Are you really sure this is a good idea? They're going to see what we're looking at." But he was interested in trying to get a date, basically. He was on the pull. So he was the tutor constable. He was the one in charge. He sent me downstairs to make a coffee and sort of say to the ladies, that if they wanted to, they could come upstairs. That happened, and then a couple of days later, we're hauled into the inspector's office and we're having our butts absolutely tanned. And basically all the blame was put on me, and they said that the operation had failed because of something I'd said. And I'd always been brought up that you back your colleagues and you're not a grass, that sort of thing. So I remember standing there looking at the other constable who was just looking straight ahead, and everything was blasted at me. So again, that was a blot on my copybook. Although I'd done some other great things, like we'd done a raid on an escaped prisoner in a tower block who was wanted for a shotgun attack, a raid on a post office. And we believed he had a shotgun in there, and as we tried to go through the door brace didn't work, and I ended up piling through the door and detaining the two guys in the bedroom, and I was praised for that. But all of that sort of got pushed to the side because of what had happened with the OBS. And as I say, when we came out of this meeting, the other officer apologised profusely and said, Neil, I've been looking to try and get on divisional obs. If I'd have said that it was my idea, there's no way I'd ever do it. Don't worry, I've got your back. I'll make sure this doesn't go negatively against you. So I'd had two massive hits in the first 15 weeks when I was trying really hard to sort of try and make a go of this and be as good as an officer as I could be. And then we went back to Brighton on Dunsmore, and it was really weird because after they'd sort of given me this negative feedback, the class came back to me and said, Neil, there's a chap in there, I'm not going to mention names or what forces they were from, but he wasn't West Mids, was sort of trying to tell everybody what to do all the time, and they didn't feel that they could do anything unless he'd given a say so, and he was trying to lord it over the group really. And they came to me and said, Neil, you're the only one who can take him on, you're the only one who'll stand up to him, can you have a word with him and tell him to basically back off and let us just get on with our lives and do what we want to do? Which I thought was hilarious after they'd all stabbed me in the back as I'd seen it. And I basically said, well, you made your bed, you lie in it. If you don't like the way he's trying to lord the group and take control over everything, then, be adults and be the people that you should be able to be positive and basically tell him. And they begged and pleaded with me to take him on. And I must admit, I'd taken a bit of resentment to him, so I agreed to do that and basically called him out. And he wasn't going to be man enough to try and stand up to me in a physical way. I was still quite a big chap back then, and he was full of hot air. And I called him out in the class with everybody there and said, look, they're fed up of you, you little dictator. They're going to do what they want to do when they want to do it. You're not going to arrange everything for them. And then they all came over and said, oh, thank you, Neil, thank you. So it was a little small win in my ways, but there was that blot on my copybook. Anyway, we finished writing, and then we went to our stations. Everything was going okay, but they'd put me over in Coventry, and I was actually living in Redditch, and I managed to get a move across to Kings Heath Police Station. So whilst I was at Kings Heath, we had an inspector there, and as I say, I was a reasonably large guy back then, quite muscular. I'd always been confident. People that knew me either loved me or hated me, and quite a few disliked me and said I was cocky or I was arrogant or too big for my boots, that sort of thing. But I was just a confident guy. I'd always been a people person, so I was quite an extrovert, and you knew if I walked in a room and I'd be saying hello and talking to people and that sort of thing. And I just thought I was being friendly, but some of them took umbrance to this, and they'd heard that this bodybuilder was coming onto their shift, and I basically pulled up in a a sports car with a heavy suntan, and they took a disliking to me, which I hadn't realised at the time. I think they felt a little bit threatened. Their masculinity was threatened in some way. But it didn't go brilliantly there. The inspector took a disliking to me, and I think one of the comments that he made to me at some point was, as long as I've got a hole in my arse, Neil, you are not going to make it through your probation. So it was quite a rough 2 years, and all this time what I didn't realise is that from somebody who had always been quite a high achiever, I'd always prided myself on rising to a challenge. If you played sport, you only played it to win, and I was slowly having that confidence eroded and chipped away at, and to the point where I was basically being harassed and bullied by this inspector. I'm not sure about the legalities of sharing some of this stuff because I don't have any real evidence now to back any of it up, but basically he then left and went to Lloyd House into complaints and discipline and promised me that if I ever got treble nines, which is a complaint against me, he would look forward to investigating it and making sure again that he could try and get me out of the police force. Now, I absolutely loved the job. I loved that being in service to the public, and tried to do everything I could do to be a good police officer. Um, and then there were other things going on the shift where they were some very good thief takers. There was a nucleus of guys that were basically ruling the shift. They were teacher's pet, as I used to like to call them. But I've got to be careful here. But they got up to things that I disagreed with. And I saw quite a few of them have been bully boys, in that they wouldn't have the nerve to do what they'd done out on the streets if they weren't in uniform and had that protection of the other bullies that were in there. So I had a real difficulty in dealing with some of the way they operated. Let's just say that I felt that it sailed a little bit close to the wind, and I believe that, we swore an oath to the Queen to protect and serve and to uphold the law rather than administer the law, and that's all I'm going to say on that. So over that period of time, looking back, what I realised is I was becoming an absolute nightmare to work with, I should imagine. I was very angry all the time. Unfortunately, my response back then was, if something's attacking you, you meet it head on. So my anger was increasing day by day. I suppose, if I'm honest, I used to suffer with road rage, and didn't realise that my everyday norm was a thin slice away from being red mist angry. So I must have been an absolute, everything was, oh, this is getting on my nerves because of this, or I blamed everything on everything else, and nothing was my fault really, I suppose. Which is quite common. And as I say, at the end of these videos, I'm going to actually go through the techniques that I use in coaching now. So everything in my world was outside in. I was just reacting to everything that was happening to me at the time. So the harassment, the bullying, the colleagues that weren't very supportive. And I could go into all sorts of different things here, but as I say, I don't know the legalities of this, and I don't know what I'm allowed to say or not to say without sort of getting myself in trouble or upsetting other people or whatever. So as I say, I'm going to try and keep it as personal as I can, but try and give you some information of what was going on. So looking back, I hadn't realised that I truly hated going into work. I really would, when I finished to have a few days off, be exhilarated by the fact I wasn't having to go in there and deal with these people. But I still actually loved the job. And although a lot of them would probably say, I don't know, I wasn't the best police officer. I didn't really do well with putting together files and that sort of thing, and some of that went back to the training that we'd had at Ryton, which wasn't the best on files, and things were changing all the time. And as I became also started to feel more isolated, I felt less and less empowered to ask for help or advice, because that just showed a weakness, or it fed into what the inspector thought of me, which is that I was useless. Then we had a new inspector on shift. As I say, the other one had gone, and he passed in this whole dossier on me and told him to watch for me and, do whatever he could to get rid of me. But he said he'd give me a clean slate, and that he would just give me a clean slate and see how it went. So after a bit of a rough start, as I say, with this other inspector, I was sort of settling in and feeling that although I still didn't really particularly enjoy the thought of going to work with them, I still enjoyed serving the public and doing the job to the best of my ability. Within that period of time, within the period of time I was in the force, I did receive some commendations for bravery above and beyond the call of duty, which was quite funny because most people that do supposedly brave things don't think they're doing anything that's outside the norm. But it was good to have those under my belt, and I'd also had quite a few of the public actually write in, and on file I had a number of letters, to the point where those sorts of things were sort of saving me from the axe almost, because a lot of police officers go through the whole of their careers without receiving anything positive in from the public or thanking them for how they dealt with things. And certain things I was very good at, interviewing, taking statements, drawing out that story from people. So yeah, things were going along, but I wasn't really in a good place. I wasn't sleeping particularly well. Um, Being on shifts meant that I wasn't really able to go to the gym the way I had before, which had been a great sort of release for anger and endorphin rushes and all that sort of thing. So became a bit out of shape, I suppose, compared to how I'd been prior to that, and that had taken some toll on me as well. And then a situation happened where we had paraded, on, I think it was on afternoons, working a 210, and we were told that there was a warrant for an arrest of a certain gentleman that I'd had previous experience of, and I'd seen him on the high street prior to driving in and parading. So we left the parade with another officer that I was on patrol with that day, and we went up the high street and saw that this gentleman had gone into one of the stores. So I said, look, he's an absolute animal. He's bitten police officers, he's done all sorts of different things. So I don't know if I should say, but you get criminals of various different guises, but we used to say, you then get the scum of the earth, and this was a gentleman that had done things that general criminals wouldn't have done. Yeah, he was a proper low life, as we used to say. I'm sure that's not politically correct these days, but I'm just saying it as it is. I'm trying to speak of my reality. So we tried to execute an arrest, in which there was a melee, and within making that arrest, he tried to bite a chunk out of my chest, and I was hitting him profusely in the mouth, and he was bleeding, so hitting him in the face to try and make him let go. A lot of blood, cross-contamination, and CS had only just come out, and the officers in attendance, because we brought the high street to a standstill, the other officers in attendance, some of them used CS spray. This guy was a druggie, didn't really affect him, but when we got taken back down to the station, we were put into holding cages outside, because to get rid of CS, you don't use water, you use a breeze, because if you use anything to dilute it, such as water, it just makes it worse. So you're there, your eyes are going, and you've got snot and tears all coming out, and all the rest of it. And that's when he rolled up his sleeves and he said, "Welcome to the AIDS Club." At that point, the only thing I could think of was, he's such a low-life tosspot scumbag. He's got track marks all up his arms. He was as riffy as there could be, that it was, oh my God, I'm going to have HIV. Now, again, if people are offended by what I say, I'm talking about 20 odd years ago, before political correctness was about, and I just saw that as a death warrant. I know that these days people live a very happy life and a full life on meds and all the rest of it. We have control of it, but back then, to me, the potential of having that meant that he might as well have put a gun to my head and pulled the trigger. So back then, you take your initial test, and then it was 17 weeks before you got your results to say whether or not you were positive or negative. I'm sure they've sped all of that up. And I tried to use police humour and still stay at work. We had a couple of trials with this guy. At the first one, in court one in Birmingham, he spat at the judge, and they took it that seriously that they cancelled the court and had a team of experts go in in all sorts of protective gear to clean up his spittle, and that sort of thing. So this sort of stuff just added to my belief that I was going to be HIV, added to the years of bullying and harassment, and the fact that, yeah, in my head, um, I wasn't doing very well. Things took a huge turn for the worst. I didn't want my family to know what was going on, and my sister was just about to give birth, or just given birth, to my niece, who's absolutely wonderful. And because I hadn't told them what was going on and what was happening, I didn't want to be around anybody. I believed that I was an infectious person and didn't want people near me. Became obsessed with cleaning and making sure if I touched anything it was washed and that sort of thing. As I say, I was still at work, and as you hear with so many of these cases where people have succumbed to the negative thoughts and possibly, committed suicide or attempted, and then people say, gosh, we had no idea at all that they were going to do that. I was putting a brave face on when I went in, but I knew I wasn't doing well. I didn't really speak to any about it, but every time I did, it was always blaming the situations that were happening around me as being my reality and the reason why I felt the way I felt. And I remember on the day or just before I actually got sent to see the full surgeon, I remember sitting down at a desk, and you had to put your name on the first three pages of a crime report, or sorry, a person in custody, prisoner file, about 5 times, I think, on the first 3 pieces of paper. Again, I could be wrong, and I'm sure it's very different now, but at the age of almost 30 years old, I sat and put my name, and for 20 minutes I deliberated, had I actually spelled my name correctly. That's how bad I was, but I was still in uniform, and I was a runner in the cell block at the time, and we had a prisoner in who was being a little bit mouthy, just an inconvenience to people, something that I was very good at sort of blocking out and just water off a duck's back. And I lifted the cell hatch, the little hatch, the peephole, and I smacked this guy in the face, realizing that what I'd just done and how out of order that was, because he was just being mouthy. He was behind a locked door. He was in a cell, for God's sake. What could he really do? But I'd lost it that much, and it's sort of out of control. But luckily, the female sergeant had seen a stress case, or been around people that had been stressed, and she sent me to go and see the force surgeon. I went to Lloyd House, saw the force surgeon. I don't really remember much about what happened there, but he asked me what I would do if this Anthony Hoey was in the room with me. And I saw the report a number of years later, and what I'd said I was going to do to this guy was, a horror film, triple X, from ripping his spine out, pulling his heart out of his chest, breaking every single bone in his body. And I would have, if you'd have put him in front of me at that point, I would have absolutely pulled this person apart. I'd have killed them. And I justified that by saying, he's killed me, he's given me HIV, even though I didn't know if I was or wasn't at that point. I was absolutely certain that that's what had happened. That was my belief. That's truly what I believed. And surprisingly, by the time I got from Lloyd House in the centre of Birmingham back to the station, I was met by, I think, the superintendent and the head of CID. And they basically said that the full surgeons rung us and said, you're off duty. And at that point, I didn't really know what to think or what to do. occupational health got involved, and that's when it was like falling off the edge of a cliff. That's when the panic attacks were kicking in, although I'd had panic attacks in a car, the police car, prior to that. But some of that is quite shady in the memory now. As I say, it's a good time ago, and I was suffering a mental health disorder. And back then, I didn't believe in people with mental health disorders. I thought they were weak-minded fools that needed to pull the socks up and get on with it. You know, you make your bed, you lie in it, you're a strong man, you know, things like this. Only weak-minded fools suffer from. So I'd got this real battle, I suppose, going on in my mind, and all I did was think. It was thought after thought after thought after thought. They arranged for me to meet with a counsellor, and that man basically saved my life. But it took many, if not hundreds of hours of counselling and convalescent home. I had to do a 16-week anger management course, relaxation courses. I mean, everything. They threw everything at me. I mean, I was so lucky in a lot of respects, because the normal everyday person does not get the help and support and advice that I received throughout the whole of that. Being paid a full pay, and being told that, you know, you take as much time as you need. But that's, I suppose that's when everything really started to sort of get on top of me. That's when, yeah, as I say, I fell off the edge of a cliff, and that's when the real mental health disorder really started to sort of show. Now I'm going to stop it there. It may be a strange point to stop, but I've covered quite a bit of ground, and I don't know if I've shared too much about some of the stuff, and whether or not I'm making myself in trouble for saying some of the things I've said, but I could say a hell of a lot more. It's just you don't have proof to be able to back any of that up, so that'd be pointless. And I'm not saying these things to try and get other officers in trouble, but everything that happened to me, I believed, was outside in. Everything that I was going through was because of, you know, the bullying, the harassment, the way I was treated, the way the other officers had treated me. Yes, I understood that perhaps I hadn't performed as well as I could, but I wasn't really aware at this point how I'd changed. I was, as I say, I was angry all the time. But thinking that at that point, when I was told I wasn't fit to be on duty, as I say, that's when I fell off the edge of the cliff. And however much I thought I may have been suffering before that, it wasn't a patch on what was to come. So, as I say, I'm going to stop there for this video. There will be obviously a number of videos in this series. And I want to stop there, because the importance of how that then affected me is really important. Now, some people call it a hero story, and I know that's terminology that's used today, but I don't buy into that. I think my hero story is the fact that I've spent 20 plus years trying to understand what stress is, how it attacks people, and how best to try and help them. I think that's more of a hero story than just saying what I actually went through. So I want to do justice to the symptoms, to how it affected me, how my behaviour changed, my psychology changed. My health certainly took a massive turn for the worst. And as I say, I want to give that justice by trying to express as much as possible what I was thinking and feeling and what was happening at that time. So I need to get into a slightly different headspace, and yeah, I noticed my voice has probably dropped a little bit, and I'm perhaps a little bit slower. And don't worry about that. I know these are just thoughts, and I can deal with those. I'm trained to do that now. So, but to get into the next part, I've got to spend some time going back and reliving, almost trying to go back in time to be able to do justice to some of the emotions and the feelings and the like that I was going through. And to do that, I need some time to prepare and get myself ready to be able to share that with you. So that's just a lead up point, and I've missed out absolutely loads. As I say, I did have an anxiety attack in one of the police cars. Um, but sharing the fact that at 30 or almost 30 years old, I couldn't even be sure that I'd spelt my own name, and sat there for 20 minutes deliberating in my own brain, have I spelt my name correctly? And then not being sure I had, leaving the paperwork, leaving it to say, I'll come back to that later. That shows the condition mentally that I was in prior to hitting this guy in the cell block, and how you can fool people so much. I was a policeman. I was on duty. I could have gone to any call at that point. I could have gone to a robbery in progress, a distraction burglary, a burglary at a house, a murder, a riot, anything at all that comes up as a police officer. And at that point, I was still faking it to everybody. As I say, I'm sure it was an absolute nightmare to work with, because I was very erratic. I was all over the place. I was Mr. Angry all the time, and effing and jeffing and whinging and moaning about everything that was happening to me. So, as I say, I'm going to get it to that point. I'm going to leave it there. And in the next video, I'm going to try and go as deep as possible about what it was like to, as I still say, it was a living hell. It was the darkest place I've ever been to in my life, and I made a promise to myself that as I was recovering, I would never, ever, ever go back there. And I don't know how many times I've said this in my life. That expression, if I had a pound for every time I'd said it would be a rich man. I would not have wished this on my worst enemy. It was the hardest, most challenging, most demanding, in every which way and form, sort of episode in my life. And as a man, I had no way of attacking it. I didn't understand it. As I said, I thought people suffering mental health disorders were weak-minded fools. Obviously, I know that is not the case. But as I say, I'm going to stop there. I'm absolutely going to be fine. Don't worry about me. I'm just going to take some time out and just to gather my thoughts and allow myself to have a quiet mind, and allow this to sort of wash over me. And as I say, I'm going to prepare ready for the next one in a week or so, and try to get really deep into sharing the experiences and some of the thoughts and the things that happened. And hopefully it'll hit a chord with people. It may give them an insight into perhaps their own mental health state at this point in time, or just give people a better understanding of what stress was for me. And it's different for every single person. Every single person that ever suffers will have slightly different tweaks to what it did or didn't do for them. This isn't a blueprint of how it works for you. So I blamed everything that had been going on as my reality. And that's one of the major issues with mental health and how people think these days, is it's always outside in. It's always blaming the situation that they see as being reality for the reason why they feel the way they feel. So as I say, at the end of all of these, I'll be doing another video talking about those experiences and where reality comes from and how I see things now. So yeah, I hope this is a small insight. I hope it gives you a taste of what's to come. And yeah, I just hope that you may have got something already, or this has set you up to want to potentially watch the next video. So yeah, I hope everybody is okay at the moment, I say, with the coronavirus and everything that's going on out there. Um, and I'm going to try and make it as real as possible for the next one by going as deep as I possibly can to a very dark past, um, which may cause some distress in people, as I'd said previously. But if that's the case, you just get in touch with me, have a conversation with me, and I'm sure we can make things right for you. But yeah, don't allow this to disturb you in any way, shape, or form. These are just my thoughts, just my reality. And as I say, this is something that happened over 20 years ago. So that's it for the first one. I hope, yeah, as I say, it did something for somebody. And yeah, I look forward to, say, look forward.